On this week's episode of Psyched On The Street, we went to Pasar Seni together with our friends from UTM to ask participants on the streets what they think about mental health and what it means to them. Here's what they have to say. So what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the term mental health?
First thing
减肥的时候就是女孩子减肥会影响到自己的心理，就会说减肥过度还是什么这样子，有想要心理的上的问题这样子。
Maybe stress.
Depression. Kesihatan lah pasal kita punya penjagaan stres. Kalau kita stres semua.
Pasal kesihatan mental.
Mental like the situations with how they handle with the situations about their studies like that. So like what they think about it and all that. Yeah.
Anxiety disorders. Yeah. So mental health to me is something that people have to face in order to go through their daily lives, especially in this kind of situations where we are going through this pandemic era. So yeah.
Our friends from Psychic at UTM sent out an anonymous survey online to collect stories of those who are struggling with mental health issues. We then used those stories on the streets to ask what people think and how they felt about it.
From a very young age, I've had to accept the fact that my mother could never love me like she loved my sibling. Do not get me wrong, she has done so much for me, more than I could ever ask for. But as much as that was true, there are also moments where the things she said and did would make me think of ending everything.
I'm afraid that people will say that I'm just overacting and being ridiculous. I also think that I'm not supposed to feel that way because I don't face big hardship in life. I have frequent suicidal thoughts. The feelings of people constantly judging me interfere with the way I communicate and make me feel isolated and unworthy. So it is better if I didn't exist at all. I don't want to self-diagnose, but usually when something like an anxiety attacks happen, I will have a fast heartbeat, like my heart wanted to jump out of my chest. A choking feeling in my throat, nausea. It feels like I'm watching my body from the outside, dizziness.
When I was a child, around 8 years old, there was a group of naughty kids in my neighborhood. They taught me about sex. Started to get involved in this immoral activity. My private area is no longer private. The worst part is I don't remember any of their face when I grew up. I live in fear of years until now.
After reading this, how does it make you feel? What do you think?
Sometimes pun akan rasa macam tu juga.
Oh yeah.
Macam boleh relate.
Walaupun family tak broken, tapi sometimes bukan family kita tau, family orang lain yang buatkan family kita rasa macam tu.
Surrounding pun lah.
Rasa macam sedih sebab dia just nak mak dia rasa proud of him. So macam dia kurang kasih sayang lah. So mak dia kena perbaiki benda tu lah.
It feels heavy to actually thought that someone would really have to face that in their normal daily lives, because for me, I've witnessed a few. Some of my friends are being affected by the COVID and pandemic era and all that. So it's very heartening to watch they have to go through that in order for them to go throughout their daily lives.
Happiness is a source of medicine.
Okay. Anything else to add?
Nope. Life is fantastic.
So if this person is in front of you right now, what will you say to them?
Eventually benda tu akan solve itself lah.
Jangan rasa down sangat.
Saya rasa macam better kita dengar dulu apa yang diorang nak jelaskan. Macam if someone yang kita kenal ada mental health atau mental issue apa-apa, kita dengar apa yang diorang nak cakap dulu. Bagi diorang explain dulu masalah diorang, and then baru kita bagi nasihat kita. So that janganlah dia baru nak cakap, oh aku rasa macam aku ada depression, kita terus judge, oh kau ni tak solat kot, tak kau imat kot, macam tu.
I just want to let them know that I'm here. No matter what and how, I know that sometimes people who are facing this kind of things, they would not want any presence in between because they feel like they have lost all of their hopes in life. So I just want to let that person know that I'm going to be here. I'm going to be here whenever they need me, and if they need me for anything, I'm just going to be here for them.
What would you say is something that we can do as just citizens to reduce the stigma of mental health?
I think mental health is not very well discussed in Malaysia. It's something that we need to promote better, not just in Malaysia but globally. And there need to be more understanding, acceptance, and basically normalize it, don't stigmatize it.
Cuba kita berada dalam situasi orang tu, sebab setiap orang dia akan rasa berbeza tau. Tak semua orang rasa benda yang sama. Mungkin family yang A ni okey, family dia tak, parents dia okey. Yang family B ni family dia macam tak okey kan. So we have to be in their shoes lah. Kita kena ada sikap kasih sayang, prihatin, sympathy semua. So as a human being, you should be sympathy with others.
Kalau akak pula, ada tambahan ke?
For me, jangan compare lah your problem problem kita. Sebab macam everyone lain-lain.
Alright. So ada apa-apa lagi boleh tambah ke?
Jangan pendam perasaan tu seorang diri, and cuba cari cara yang baik lah untuk cerita kat orang lain.
Reach out to someone. It doesn't need to be a professional. Reach out to someone, as long as it's a person, that will help open up doors and help at least show that there is not just one ending way. There's many other pathways to be in a better place.
Different people have different tolerance in terms of situations, so we cannot judge by saying that, oh, you can bear this, I cannot. Why I can bear this, why you can't? So should like change the way of thinking like that.
I would hold to the quote, some things are better left unsaid, because sometimes people, we don't know what certain people are facing in their normal daily lives. So in some people, even if you say something that maybe to us it's not something, maybe to that person, if they heard something that is not very uncommon for them to hear, it will have a bit of effect in their life. So for me, some things are better left unsaid, because normally these days people are being like so judgmental. They want to say something about everything. I think that should be stopped.
Okay, so for this episode, these people actually went to Pasar Seni area, and we wanted to talk a bit more about mental health. And since I wasn't there, this little snippet that we have is actually an interview, because apparently things didn't go really well during that day during the shoot. So I wanted to get a bit of insights, because Matt is also a psychology student, and I wanted to hear his thoughts on how he felt during that day, asking these questions and seeing things behind the camera. So generally, how did you feel overall throughout that day?
So I think it was very surprising, the results. I think sometimes you take for granted when you have studied it for a long time that everybody should know about it, right? And the reality is a lot of people don't, and a lot of people haven't had the need to explore this topic and why this is a problem. I think that a lot of people hear this word now because it's a buzzword on social media everywhere they go, and they've probably heard people talk about it, right? And I feel there's a lot of pressure on people to know something. So a lot of people actually didn't want to be interviewed by us because they were scared to say the wrong thing. And I think those who did participate were very cautious of what they said, and they were like, what if I say the wrong thing and people are going to think, differently of me? I think it was very surprising to see all these things, and that that there's been so little education about it. And even though there is a lot of awareness, like people know the word, what the word means, and like the various degrees of mental health, many people don't know. So people just think, oh, it's someone having an episode or that. But actually, from a lot of the stories that they were reading, these were people who they had regular jobs, regular lives. Someone you might not even notice, having that problem, but they did, and I think some people they weren't even sure when they were reading it is this even a mental health issue? So yeah.
I think one of the things that you mentioned just now is like, because we studied so long, like we studied psychology, it's also like this safety bubble.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like you go to university and you're in a psych department, 90% of your time you're going to meet psychology students. Yeah. So you think the world is like that, but the reality is actually a lot of people don't know, right? I think another point that you mentioned just now, like when you said that a lot of people were very cautious about how to answer certain questions, like especially like what is stigma or what is mental health. I come from a different perspective. When I was rewatching the footage, I felt like people actually genuinely do not know what it means. And it was very interesting when we asked like, what is actually mental health? People could translate it for us, and that was it. But they couldn't explain like what actually is mental health. Like if I were to ask you now, what is mental health, Matt? Would you be able to say it like in a sentence?
Oh, it's very difficult to condense in like one thing because it's so many things.
Yeah, it's definitely very tough. Yeah. And a lot of the words that we sort of picked out, I mean, when I was looking at the footage as well, it's like people usually associate mental health with stress or things that they cannot tolerate certain things in their life or they cannot cope, right? The truth is actually sometimes mental health is not situational, right? Sometimes it is part and parcel of things like your hormones, right? When you have very low serotonin, dopamine, that's when you feel very depressed, very low, and it causes a few more other things like anxiety attacks and stuff. So it's actually quite not just situational. It's not just like your context, like, oh, I'm super stressed, right? Therefore I have mental health issues. But when we looked at all the surveys that came in, so what our partners did, Psychic, they are from UTM. So what they did before this recording is that they actually went out to get anonymous sort of responses from people on how they are feeling in regards to like themselves. So there were a lot of things that I think over like 40 responses that we went through. And a lot of it was, some of it was situational. Like, my mom did this, my mom said that, they don't love me. Those kind of things is quite situational. But there were a few responses that were just, I just feel this way.
There was one story in particular that I think really caught my attention. There was one person who said that their life was actually okay. But they were dealing with all these things, like that feelings that I think they also couldn't understand why they were having all these things. There was a lot of hopelessness in it. So it's very, very complex. I think sometimes you think, and not saying that it isn't, there are a lot of people who have had very traumatic experiences and then they have a lot of challenges to deal with. But there are some people who, like you said, it could be various things, right? Nothing may have happened to you when you were a child or when you were a teenager, but it could be, like a hormonal thing. It could be just your general, your emotional state of being, the kind of person that you are. So there's many, many things that are about it. I think a lot of people don't consider. And I think if you don't pass like a certain threshold in terms of, I don't like to use the word, but symptoms, then it's not like a mental health problem.
I think a lot of people generally don't really understand what mental health is versus mental disorders, for example, right? So I think mental health, maybe we can clarify a bit. Mental health is generally everything in regards to your mental health, your well-being, how you're doing, how you're feeling, how you're coping with your life. That's mental health in general. You don't have to have a disorder or a disease or illness to consider yourself as mentally like having issues, right? I think from my end, I think from my perspective specifically is that the reason why I encourage people to look for professional help is as simple as this. Not everybody, like your friend, your mother, your sister, your family, a stranger, is able to actually have your best interest in mind. Unfortunately, that's just being human, right? Sometimes we also get defensive. Like our friends tell us like, oh, I feel very sad when you do this. Then they're like, why I do this? They get very defensive. They don't really focus on you completely. But if you go to a professional, their job is to focus on you completely and they're a bit more objective because like if you go for counseling, not just like, clinical therapy or anything, but counseling itself is quite structured. Because they actually have a goal in mind for you to move forward, to make your life a little bit more functional than before and stuff like that. And to also refer you to the right people when you need extra help.
And sometimes the people who are very close to you are too close to the situation itself to be able to think rationally.
And sometimes they want to problem solve for you, which is not what you need at points of time. Sometimes you need to go through an entire process of digging what's happening, what triggered you, your situations that created this way, or maybe you have, like we mentioned just now, more psychological and physical kind of issues like hormonal things that causes these kind of symptoms. So this person, a professional, they're trained to do that, right? Which is why I always encourage people, if you're feeling like you need someone to talk to. Yeah, you can speak to a friend, but think of it this way. If you're in a vulnerable state, you talk to somebody, and somebody doesn't understand that vulnerability, and they're going to say something that might affect you.
Right.
That's doing much more harm than what you intended to do, which is to share with somebody. Yeah, so that's where I come in that aspect. I know that saying that to a friend or family is comfortable because you expect them to really listen to you and care for you. And I'm not doubting that. But sometimes people cannot be that role that you expect them to be.
Not everybody has those kind of people in their family who can take on that.
Yeah. So I've had friends who are actually like that. They think that friends and family are the ones that can go and talk to, and it backfires. Backfires so bad. But I know they want that comfort. So what we always encourage people to do is that if you're very afraid to go for counseling or therapy alone, you bring a friend with you. And that friend actually learns from the therapist on what to do when these situations happen. They are able to listen to you a bit more actively and give you the attention you need, but at the same time also understand where you're coming from and see what kind of help they might need to alert your therapist about. So I do think that's quite important, which is what I don't see in the footage. I think like only one person out of the 6-7 people we interviewed actually said, look for professional help, which is that to me is very surprising. Yeah, it is actually very shocking to me. Yeah.
It was very scary that not many people suggested that, because again, maybe they always, if you have to do that, means you are like a lost cause.
Yeah.
But you're not lah. And I think that's the part, like, that's the stigma that needs to be addressed here.
Yeah.
You're okay with a psychologist only when it's this, you know. Why not when it's here,
Correct.
Why wait for it to get there to,
It's like, as much as people say that Malaysians are okay with mental health, or at least they have that awareness, I do think that stigma has never really left. Maybe like 10% over the 5-7 years that I've observed, people actually do talk about these things a bit more. But then again, we are psych students. So most of our friends and family are in that space. But if I were to talk to strangers about mental health, like when you have deep conversations with people, they'll be like, hey, why are you so serious? It's immediate, like, why are you complaining about your life? It's not like, oh, what's really going on? They don't really sit down and listen to you, as compared to when you're speaking to a psych student. Maybe 70% of the time, they will actually understand what you're going through.
I think a lot of us who went to study, right, our families, they went and did some reading, and after they, because like there was a lot of people are wondering like why.
Or maybe we're just overly educating our family as well at the same time.
Yeah. Because once they find out that we can't read their minds, right, they're like, what can you actually do? But a lot of my friends who have studied this, you notice that their families do know more. Then it doesn't really help our bubble sometimes, I feel, because then everybody suddenly knows about psychology, which is good, I guess, in a way. More people get educated, but then we kind of, again, things like this trip we took, right, to go and see, it comes off very surprising. Because you're like, hey, how come you don't know this? Because like my 10 friends know about this. My 10 friends know to refer to this person when someone needs help, or to go to a psychologist. Then you realize like that's 10 people in how many people that live in just the Klang Valley area, right? So
I would say like this episode itself is like an inception for us. Doing this psych series, we sort of expect people to reach a certain level to understand what some of the psychological issues or things that we talk about. But the truth is, when we went to the streets, it's quite eye-opening that actually not a lot of people understand it or know what to do when people are in this situation. And we talk about stigma a lot, right? And when we ask people like, oh, do you know what stigma is for mental health? Most of them couldn't answer it, right? Some of them answered things like, oh, it's when people, when you tell somebody your problems, like you go and tell your friend, I'm doing this, they will sort of top it up or gaslight you and say that, I also going through this, why are you so stressed, why you cannot cope? It's all about stress management, coping mechanisms, rather than, oh, this person is going through a hard time and what can we do?
That kind of statement like, you're going to a psychologist.
It's
what? Like that.
And that kind of stigma is still very prevalent here, I would say, even though we think Malaysians are reaching that certain level. Like if you look at LinkedIn itself or YouTube and all that, we talk about mental health a lot. But why? The biggest question for me when I was looking at all this, right, the biggest question I had in my mind is that we're doing so much educational pieces on mental health and mental disorders. But why is it that the people we meet are still not there? maybe we are just being very idealistic to say that when we do these things, people are actually going to learn something about it. But the truth is, it is so disintegrated from actually things that they can do practically, or it's not their part of their like habit. Maybe that's why we don't see it happening. Some things that I was listening over and over again in the footage were like, one of the things that really like made me like really stopped in my tracks is somebody who said this, what they will say to the person while they were reading what they were going through is that it will solve itself. And in my head, I was like, oh my God, red flag everywhere. I was like, what do you mean it will solve itself? Because it became something like, everybody go through this stage in life. You know, as a teenager, you're going to fight your parents. You're going to think that you're worthless. You're going to think that people don't love you. They love your sibling much more. And because we have that perception, imagine telling a kid, it will solve itself. And that kid brings that into their adulthood. And then they become broken adults. And then they go for therapy after that. You know what I mean? Like so much things that is flowing like that over and over again. It comes down to, you hear this word a lot, right? Empathize with people. I think the ability to empathize with people is not something that is gonna happen overnight. It's not a skill set that you can watch YouTube videos and learn it.
Yeah.
You have to be participative in it in your life, right? Being able to walk in somebody else's shoes is not saying like, oh, I see that shoe before, I know the color, I know the size, and that's it, right? That's empathy. That's not. To be able to walk in their shoes is to actually feel the pain that they go through. And the generation of the now, I think we tend to conceal, don't feel.
Yeah.
Because we are like, oh, good vibes only. You know, that's a mantra that we now hold, right? Good vibes only. All the bad vibes, all juju, all go away.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, I think, with the younger generation.
Yeah.
So maybe to wrap up what we're trying to say overall, I think one of the things that came out from this, I think at the end of the day, is that there are things that we can do in our lives, on our own level that we can do to help other people. And it's so simple as to just stop before you speak, or just take a pause before you say something in response, or say a joke and stuff like that. Or apologize after, or ask after, how actually did I actually offend anybody? I think these are very simple things that we can incorporate with people around us and build that into a habit. Because if people see you doing that with other people, they might be, oh, that's actually a good way to connect with one another. But again, at the end of the day, we can't really judge people for not being able to take that step. Yeah, and we're just here to share that because I think that it's important. And maybe one of the few questions maybe we can explore in the next few Psych episodes is why our generation is actually very emotionally stunted for these reasons. Why do we avoid these things? Why do we avoid tough decisions and tough conversations that we are actually supposed to have so that we can actually mature in our emotional stability? Yeah, so maybe that's something we can explore next time.
Right.